Good morning, everyone. This is my final peer review for our close readings of Psalms. Um, I've had a lot of fun doing this. It's really interesting to me, like I mentioned in my week 6 close reading. It's really interesting to me to get to see the different viewpoints and different aspects of the psalm that other people bring out, things that I would never have figured out on my own, things that even the great theologians and the people who write the commentaries for these psalms that don't have any of this information in there. So it's really cool to me to be able to see that from us just simple college students are able to bring out so much information as each person sees it. Even so much more when in this case for this week, this psalm was one that I considered doing for week 6, and it partners with the one I did so well. So once again, I'm actually doing a peer review for Savannah. I think I just did one for you a couple weeks ago, but we'll call you my sister from another mister. This psalm that you did, Psalm 25, to me is a sibling of Psalm 56. I read through it when I was trying to decide which psalm I wanted to do for week 6, and it really just came down to Psalm 56 just spoke to me more as far as what I was going through at the time and what I'm still going through now. But Psalm 25 is so closely related to it. They're both, interestingly enough, about the same period in David's life. As Savannah mentioned, Psalm 25 is supposed to be around the time that Absalom was chasing David, that Absalom was trying to take the throne away from him. Historically, the information that I was able to find out that is a little bit different than what Savannah had was that even though this is attributed to David, the time that it was actually written down or put pen to paper or recorded is considered to be around the time of the Babylonian exile. And a lot of the information, a lot of the feeling and the meaning behind some of the words that are used in there can be put into that situation. Of course, the Israelites were being held by their enemies. They were being attacked by them and were being kept away from their home. The very beginning of this psalm, I think, speaks to that. Not only is it considered a prayer for guidance and protection, but just looking at the beginning and how it's worded makes me believe that. And I'm gonna make sure I put this out here for everybody. I know they have these online, and I've looked at a few on there and used them. But if you have the opportunity to pick up one of these bad boys, get one. It has been so useful with everything that I've done. You can get it in all kinds of different translations, but having the ability to look at the same verse in one book instead of having to flip back and forth to multiple books, it's just been so awesome to be able to have this. I found mine at a flea market, so you can find them anywhere. I got this one for $1.50. So if you get lucky enough to find one like that and take that blessing and use it for all the work like this that you're going to do in the future, the close readings that you'll be doing in the future, just Bible study, being able to see a verse that might be hitting home for you in a different way. So, like I said, the first few verses to me speak to that Babylonian exile. And just reading it from the King James Version, it's, "Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. O my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not mine enemies triumph over me. So the Babylonians had taken God's people from their home, from Jerusalem, from the Holy Land, the place where they felt they were connected most directly with God. It's where the temple was. It's where God's Spirit came once a year to speak to them. They were taken out of that place. And so in order to keep their spirits up, in order to keep that connection with God and feel that they still could have that contact with Him, they were asking God for a better connection with Him. Lift up my soul, I trust in Thee. Let me not be put, in one of the other versions it says, let me not be put to shame, let not my enemies exalt over me. Another way they say it, do not let my enemies triumph over me. And then in the Living Bible, it actually says, don't fail me, Lord, for I am trusting you. Don't let my enemies succeed. Don't give them victory over me. It's just, they even though they're in exile, they're not letting the Babylonians defeat them. They're not letting them take the one thing that they can control, their soul, their spirit. They still have it connected to God, and they're asking God to please keep them connected in that way. Sorry, I've got a little bit of congestion here, so I might sound a little funny. So while it was written by David or attributed to him, I feel like that connection, that historical context there is important too, because it not only was pointed to David, but then 100 years later, or 150 years later, it points to the exile that the Babylonians had God's people under. Literary context, like I said, this, even though Psalm 25 does fall within a group of psalms that talk about, in my ESV version, they're all praise psalms to God. Even though this psalm, I personally see it as a wisdom psalm, just because of the title that the ESV Bible gives it, which is "Teach me your paths." But even though there are mentions in the psalm of the psalmist asking God to protect them, to forgive them of their sins, to combat their enemies, it is a psalm that is a request for God to grant them wisdom, to teach them. Psalm 24 and Psalm 26 are both what I believe I would consider as praise psalms or thanksgiving psalms, and that David is praising God for what He has done for him. Again, like I said at the beginning, I felt like Psalm 25 and 56 were connected, in that 25 is considered to be written by David or spoken by him, however it was recorded, during the time that he was being chased by Absalom. And then Psalm 56, which I did last week, was written or refers to the time when David was hiding from Absalom in another country with the Philistines. It also it's interesting to me that ESV titles these two psalms. Psalm 25, like I said, is called "Teach Me Your Paths," where Psalm 56 is "In God I Trust." So, and of course, those two things have to be linked. You're not going to accept teaching. You're not going to get anything from someone unless you trust in them. So I feel that even though they're spaced 21 psalms apart, these two psalms are almost like brother and sister to each other. I thought that there was a lot of stuff that Savannah gave us that was just really great. She's much more in tune with the literary structure, the elements than I am. It's very difficult for me to pick those things out. The one thing I did find that I don't I don't think I heard her mention. I went back and listened a couple times, but one thing that I did find about this poem was that it was a Hebrew acrostic. So each verse within the psalm starts with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it goes in order. Now, the research that I was able to pull up did mention that for some reason or another, certain letters were skipped here and there. Sorry, you're going to hear a little echo in the background. So my son is just waking up and does not want to go and hang out with mom in bed this morning. So you might hear him chirping in every now and then. It's an acrostic psalm, and there were only a few of these. There were 7 in the book of Psalm, but it was a way to help memorize the psalm. By starting each one with a different letter and keeping them in order, it made it more convenient to memorize the psalm and remember what it said, so that you could bring it back up, bring it back to mind when you needed to. Um, as we go through the psalm, like I said, the poetic elements, that was the one that I saw, and her picking up, Savannah picking up the couplets and the triplets. I didn't even see that, even though it's written in my Bible that way. I still didn't notice that was happening. But when she mentioned it, I looked back at it again, and of course they're put together in groups of 3s and 2s, and then a long section at the end is a group of 5. And I tried to find the name of that particular style of writing, because I know I've seen it before somewhere in a more recent poem, or more, at least within the last 100 years, written in that same style, and I just could not find the name of it. So maybe if somebody else knows that's a little more educated in that, they can throw it in the comments. But I did find that really interesting, that it was grouped, even though it was an acrostic, so it was intended to be memorized and learned in order, 1, 2, 3, 4 down through the group. They grouped the verses so that the parts that meant the most together stayed together. So that the repetition, like that she picked up, I believe in verse 4, and then again in verse 6 and 7, where the psalmist, where David is asking the same thing over and over. He's repeating himself, so that point is driven home. That's an important part of this psalm. It's not just a wisdom psalm in that David is asking for God to teach him, to lead him along the paths of his life, but that it's also a petition to God. He's asking God to help him. He says, "Make me to know thy ways, O Lord. Teach me thy paths." And then again in 6 and 7, or 7, sorry. "Remember not the sins of my youth or my transgressions. According to thy steadfast love, remember me." So he wants to move forward. He wants God to take him along these paths of his life, to show him the right way, and to forget the sins of his past. It's just a further way of saying the same thing over and over to drive home that point. Sorry. Another thing that I noticed, and Savannah touched on it a little bit, was the wording, the way that words were actually used. And of course, I had to go find I don't have one of these in a hardback book. I would love to get one and find one somewhere, but I went back to the Hebrew parallel Bible that I found online, and had to look up the term fear, because it's used in a few of the verses, but significantly in verse 20 or 25:14. And I'll read the not the transliteration, but the holy. It's called the Holy Name King James Version. And this version of the Bible, instead of God and Lord, the terms are the traditional, the Hebrew words for that, or the Greek words, Yahweh and Elohim. So 25:14 says, "The secret of Yahweh is with them that fear him, and he will show them his covenant." So I've always thought this was interesting and kind of a little confusing, especially when I first started really getting into the Bible and trying to figure things out and what God was saying to us. And that's that, why would God want us to be afraid of him? And I know that there are a lot of either young Christians or unbelievers that read verses like that and feel the same way. It's like, why do I want to believe in a God or worship a God that just wants me to be afraid? There's all these verses in the Bible that say that God wants us to fear him, or if we fear him, we will be blessed, and things like that. And to a naive person who is just not educated in what those terms mean and how they were translated from the original Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek or however they were translated into English, the word fear does, I mean, we associate that with being afraid, with being scared. And that's not at all what this term means. If we look at the original term for fear, what the Hebrew term is, and I'm going to try and get it to come up here. It's, of course, I can't read the original Hebrew, but there's a transliteration version on the same page that puts those original Hebrew words into syllable stretched out words so you can actually read it. The word is pronounced, I believe, Yareh. And so it means fearing, but means morally reverent. So it's revered. So a better way, I feel, to read this verse is, "The secret of Yahweh is with them that revere him, and he will show them his covenant," or his secrets. I think that that's just a really awesome way to look at that, and that's really how we should be reading it, is that we should revere God. He doesn't want us to be afraid of him, obviously. I think most of us know that. He doesn't want us to be scared of him. He wants us to revere him. He wants us to, as it says, to be morally reverent, to live our lives in a way that reveres him. And I wanted to bring that up. I thought it was really interesting. I always think that the words that are used and how they're used are important, but also can be confusing. And that's why I love this version of the Bible, to be able to look at the original way it was written and then how it was translated and what the different meanings that those words can have. Because even though we know that the Bible is God-breathed and that it doesn't have mistakes, that God didn't screw up through people when it was translated and copied and moved, that any edits that were done to the Bible to get it to where it is now were done for a reason. So those words are there for a reason. They're not a mistake. But I think it is important to do the research of seeing what other meanings those words can have. God wants us to study it, and part of studying is research. So just the different words that are used there, depending on which translation of the Bible you have, David is asking for God to show him his ways or his paths. And I think it's important to differentiate between those two as well, because I feel that the paths that God should be teaching us, what David is asking him to do, is what guides us along our life. And this is an important way to adapt this to our modern day application to how we can use this psalm each day, is we can ask for both, because I think they are different. Even though in this particular psalm, those words are used interchangeably from one version of the Bible to the next, I think that our paths that God is leading us down, those are paths that are leading us to a goal. Those are long term. God is leading us to where he wants us to be, to where we can make that kingdom impact. And so to ask him to lead us along his paths that he has made for us is an important process, is an important request, and we need to be an a active part of that process, in asking God to continually show us where that path is leading us next. To ask God to show us how to live in His ways, or to teach us His ways, I believe is a more short-term, day-to-day request. God's ways are how we should act. They are what we should be doing right now. That's our day-to-day life. When we wake up in the morning, we ask God to show us His ways for the day, to teach us how to be more like Jesus. So just those two differentiations between paths and ways, I think, are important to the daily application of this psalm. That's about it. Like I said, Savannah, once again, awesome job. I just thought it was really cool how you picked this one in the same week that I picked what I feel is its sibling psalm. Thank y'all again for an awesome class. Thank you to our professor for all the amazing things that he has taught us as well. And I hope to see some of you next semester. It'll be my last one, and I'm really excited about graduating and a little bit sad too. But thank y'all again for having a great term.